An abolitionist is defined as a person who favors the abolition of a practice or institution, especially capital punishment or, formerly, slavery. The abolitionist movement became increasingly prominent during the 1830s when Northern figures strived for the emancipation of slaves on the grounds of religious morality. These freedom fighters came to be known as abolitionists. They believed slavery was cruel, inhumane, and unjust by God. Slave owners would harass their slaves both physically and mentally. These laborers were often whipped by their masters.
Oh, chickens. Eat up.
You ain't picking that cotton fast enough, boy.
But massa, I've been working all day. I'm trying my best.
Well, you ain't trying hard enough. Boy, I'm gonna teach you a lesson.
Some leading abolitionists were Frederick Douglass, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and William Lloyd Garrison.
Uncle Tom's Cabin is about an African American slave who's honest and caring, who faces the hardship of slavery by helping two girls escape from the hardship of a slave owner and face the whippings and brutality of the slave owner and surviving until his death.
As a free slave myself, I believe my fellow brothers in Christ that we should be free and we should have equal rights as the white man does.
My newspaper called The Liberator and the American Anti-Slavery Society has been very helpful in getting freedom for the blacks. And I don't care if people are going to prosecute me for this, but I'm going to make my voice heard.
William Lloyd Garrison was a journalist, editor, and a co-founder of The Liberator, a leading anti-slavery newspaper. Prior to his career in journalism, he became involved in anti-slavery in the 1820s. Garrison was a part of the American Colonization Society when he was 25, but broke away from the society believing that moving blacks back to the west coast of Africa was a supporting mechanism of slavery. He decided to organize a New England Anti-Slavery Society in 1832, which later turned into the American Anti-Slavery Society in 1833. Garrison was very passionate about his work, and he did not care about the consequences of him openly protesting for black rights. As he said in his famous newspaper, The Liberator, "I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard." In his 1854 speech titled, "No Compromise with the Evil of Slavery," Garrison proclaims he will not succumb to the interest of any party and cites the Declaration of Independence as proof that no man can make another man his slave. "I will not be a liar, a poltroon, or a hypocrite to accommodate any party, to gratify any sect, to escape any odium or peril, to save any interest, to preserve any institution, or to promote any object. Convince me that one man may rightfully make another man his slave, and I will no longer subscribe to the Declaration of Independence." Some abolitionists, like Harriet Beecher Stowe, expressed their anti-slavery views through literature. Harriet Beecher Stowe was a prominent American author in the abolitionist movement. In response to the Fugitive Slave Act, she created the famous novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, which talked about the harsh reality of slavery. The book revolves mostly around an honest and caring slave named Uncle Tom. The book appealed to many readers at that time because Tom's fictional adventure can be compared to actual slave experiences, from helping two girls escape to getting whipped to death by his sadistic slave owner, Simon Legree. Stowe discusses the impacts of the book in a letter to her friend after a year and a half of publishing the book, saying, "The effects of the book so far have been, I think, these. First, to soften and moderate the bitterness of feeling an extreme abolitionist. Second, to convert to abolitionist views many whom the same bitterness had repelled. Third, to inspire the free colored people with self-respect, hope, and confidence. Fourth, to inspire universally through the country a kindlier feeling toward the Negro race. In the first year of publication, the book sold over 300,000 copies. Considering many didn't purchase anti-slavery books at the time due to the tensions in the North, it was very successful. Uncle Tom's Cabin opened the eyes of Northerners to Southern cruelty and energized the North's war effort. Stowe was able to achieve her emotional appeal to her audience by humanizing slavery through vivid imagery and portraying the slave Tom as heroic and his owner Simon Legree as sadistic. Unlike Garrison's denunciating tone, Stowe was able to deepen the public's revulsion at slavery through her compassionate writing. Although abolitionist writing, both literary and journalistic, were popular means for abolitionists to voice their anti-slavery rhetoric, abolitionists like Frederick Douglass were public speakers. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery in the year of 1818 in Talbot County, Maryland. After escaping in 1838, he became a famous abolitionist leader, speaker, and writer. Many whites were surprised that a black had the intellectual capacity to become such a great, self-taught linguist. After escaping, he went to New York and got married there. He then settled in Massachusetts. He went to the same African church as Harriet Tubman. There, he became a licensed preacher in 1839, which helped him improve his speaking ability, which he would later on use to become the famous writer who influenced the course of African American history. He was a big supporter of William Lloyd Garrison in his paper, The Liberator, and after idolizing Garrison, Douglass went on to become an abolitionist orator. Douglass held an anti-slavery lectures at abolitionist meetings and was even invited to speak at the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society's annual convention in Nantucket. He moved everyone that heard his speeches. In 1852, he delivered one of his most famous speeches, which later on became to know what to the slave is the 4th of July. He spoke about the false freedoms America has offered.
The American slave is your 4th of July. I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him your celebration is a shame, your boast of liberty an unholy license. Your national greatness, swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shorts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity. More bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up comes which would disgrace a nation of savages.
Douglass played a big role through the course of the Civil War, potentially helping the Union win. Using his influential status of being the most important black American leader in the 19th century, Douglass met with Abraham Lincoln in 1863 regarding the treatment and recruitment of black soldiers. Thanks to his efforts, thousands of soldiers were added to the Union Army. Douglass also voiced his anti-slavery sentiment through his various abolitionist newspapers, including the North Star, Frederick Douglass Weekly, Frederick Douglass Paper, Douglass's monthly and New National Era. In the hundreds of speeches he gave and editorials he wrote, Douglass conveyed a message against slavery and racism and provided a voice of hope for his people.
Although Garrison, Stowe, and Douglass were the face of the abolitionist movement, there were many other abolitionists that helped greatly in the freedom of blacks. Harriet Tubman took more of a physical approach to freeing slaves. After escaping from her owner in 1849, Tubman found way to Philadelphia, found work, and made money. However, she returned to Maryland the following year to escort her sister and family to freedom. Using the Underground Railroad, hidden routes that headed north, Harriet constantly went back to the South to recruit slaves to freedom. During a 10-year span, she made 19 trips into the South and escorted over 300 slaves to freedom.
Let's go.
march towards freedom. Let's go.
Amongst abolitionists were philanthropists and politicians. James G. Birney and Gerrit Smith were two political activists who disagreed with Garrison's view that abolitionism shouldn't be involved in politics. They created the Liberty Party in the 1840s to advocate for the abolitionist cause. Though their party was minor, it did not make any significant change in government. Birney ran twice for president, but both times received very low votes. In his bid for presidency in the election of 1844, James Polk was chosen over Henry Clay by merely 38,000 votes, while Birney received 62,000 votes. Votes which could have gone to Clay if Birney didn't run for president. This was an unfortunate outcome, as James Polk was a supporter of territorial expansion as well as the expansion of slavery, but Henry Clay was an advocate for the abolition of slavery, but did not win because of votes going to Birney. Although Gerrit Smith helped in the creation of the Liberty Party, he was more a wealthy philanthropist. A staunch abolitionist, he secretly financed John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry in an effort to catch the armory that was stored there. Smith also used his money to buy acres of land in North Elba, New York, to provide to African Americans so that they could vote. He also opened his Peterborough home as a station on the Underground Railroad for fugitive slaves to use on their way north. Not to mention, he funded Frederick Douglass and abolitionist newspapers. By the mid-1840s, Smith had contributed an estimated $50,000 to the anti-slavery movement. John Brown was known as an extreme abolitionist and protester during the Civil War period. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was established to allow Kansas and Nebraska to decide whether they want to be slave or free states. This political issue wasn't going to be decided peacefully. It led to the Bleeding Kansas conflict, in which Brown gathered his sons to attack pro-slavery supporters. As a result of his rebellion, many Northerners claimed Brown as a hero for his actions at Kansas. In 1859, Brown and 21 of his followers attacked Harper's Ferry, where the nation's arsenal was located, and hoped to take their weaponry to start a slave rebellion. Now that we've talked about some major abolitionists and their efforts in the fight against slavery, let's summarize the impact they had on the United States. The abolitionists strived for the emancipation of all slaves. Rising abolitionist popularity in the North during the 1830s contributed to the regional divide between the North and the South, leading up to the Civil War. Abolitionists like Douglass and Garrison published editorials in newspapers that led to the spread of abolitionist ideas. Abolitionist authors at the time, particularly Harriet Beecher Stowe, used vivid imagery to portray horrific accounts of slavery that further demonized the South. Because of said literature, which sold over 300,000 copies in its first year, the North became aware of the cruelties of slavery. Others were public speakers and traveled the country to lecture on the evils of slavery. Such exposure to slavery, as well as the convincing fact that it was morally wrong, led to more and more citizens joining the abolitionist cause. Abolitionists also provided a voice of hope for the slaves, aided in the freedom of fugitive slaves, influenced Lincoln in the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and were the cause of certain conflicts such as the raid on Harper's Ferry, led by John Brown and financed by Gerrit Smith, amongst others. Although some abolitionists believed in the colonization of African Americans, all of them were united by the belief that slavery was a cruel and unjust system. According to author James M. McPherson, several hundred slaves escaped through the Underground Railroad per year throughout the mid-1800s. Slaves attempted to escape from this very system by running away. These runaway slaves would head north, where were chased by armed men and ferocious bloodhounds.
Get back here, boy!
Though a long journey heading north, some slaves successfully made it to freedom. Others did not.
You done, boy.